as chair of this group, it's exciting because Patricia mentioned education reform and being on the front line. And this group is a little different than most others because I think one of the things we hear and we have heard repeatedly in the education reform discussion is that departments of education have been part of the problem. And that, you know, in many instances has been true. So this group came together because, first of all, I think we feel an incredible sense of urgency about what we're doing. You know, we feel that for you legislators, our primary job is to make you as uncomfortable as possible by pushing you as far as we can push you. Because I think we saw this morning when Mr. Murdoch spoke that public schools are represented. Public school districts are represented. Public school boards, public school superintendents, public school teachers are represented. But no one represents our children. There is no representation for our children. So this group came together, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this. This group came together because of the incredible leadership of Paul Pastorek and Eric Smith, who, in my opinion, set the bar for the rest of us in terms of being what great school chiefs are. So, Paul, Eric, thank you for your leadership and your vision. But this group came together to represent children. This group came together to push policy around making sure children have choices, the most robust choices you can give in your states. This group came together to make sure that great teachers are recognized and rewarded, that good teachers have a chance to get better, and that, frankly, we have policies that remove bad teachers from classrooms. And this group came together to make sure everyone's accountable. So I am honored to be part of this group. I can't tell you how frequently we get asked, what's Chiefs for Change think about this? And it's because these are, in my opinion, the toughest, smartest, most vigilant educators we have in the United States. So I just want to say that they do have, I don't like to consider myself in this company, but these guys have the right stuff, Patricia.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about what our school systems look like and how they're not prepared for the 21st century. I think Mr. Murdoch this morning was describing that they're built for the 19th century. There's still the chalkboard and the chalk, and maybe there's a whiteboard in the corner. So let's say you could start from scratch. If you could start from scratch, this question is to any of you, how would you create our education system in America? Who wants to start? I see Chris.
Really, truly start from scratch. The first thing you do is you realize that having a system that is divided into 50 states and 15,000 school districts. I have 600 districts in New Jersey, most of which have an average of 6 schools. Creates such a patchwork that it's very, very easy to hide and to disguise failure. So I would say that the first thing I would do is I would alter the governance system such that we were not running our schools by small political entities that were very subject to some combination of mediocrity and interest group capture. I think we kind of get what we should expect in that context. By the way, I will quickly say that there are many extraordinary people who are giving of their lives to be school board members, so it's not a universal, but it is a very significant governance problem. The second thing I would do is I would organize everything we do around a very simple test, and that is this policy decision in the best interest of children? Because you can count on this. We are not doing that. As Tony said, there are a lot of different interests implicated in public education. There are the interests of employees as employees, of school districts, of superintendents, of commercial vendors, and so on. And the Venn diagram of those interests overlaps to some degree with the interest of children, but there are a lot of areas where they don't overlap. And we have built an entire system where we take care of those interests first before we, and I'll just give one example. Any great organization understands that people are the most important variable in success, and the research says that's particularly true in education. So if you take, what does a great organization do? It hires the best, it responsibly evaluates them, it retains and rewards those who are successful, it gets rid of those who are unsuccessful, and it deploys them where they are most, do the most good. Well, public education not only does all of those things badly, but there are elaborate political institutional bulwarks against changing any of those, and we've got to break through that.
And I would just add to that, I think Chris outlined those things that we are really focused on in the detail, but I would approach it with one simple statement. We need to break up the monopoly and create a competitive education environment, period. You heard Mr. Murdoch mention the term monopoly several times today. And it is a word that we should be talking more and more about. Because in a monopolistic environment, there is no incentive to get the outcomes we're trying to get. Now, there are good people who are trying to get those outcomes, but the system beats it out of them. The system needs to be competitive. So if I were to lay the landscape bare and create schools, schools would come into existence if they achieve the outcome, and if they don't, they go out of business. If schools achieve the outcome, they get more schools to operate. And you can have school boards around that, you can have principals around that, you can have superintendents around that. But you must compete for the privilege of educating children. It should be seen not as a right of local school districts to educate children. It is a privilege to educate children. And when we change the dimension of right versus privilege and monopoly versus competition, it will work incredibly better. I just ask you, go down and see New Orleans. It ain't perfect. It's on the pathway to success, but it is the most highly competitive system in the country.
If I were to create a brand new system, I would think of something that I read in a book where a CEO of a major corporation created a 500-year strategic plan. Okay? And so when we plan for the future, often our future is as long as our election cycle. And so by looking into the future, we can work backwards and figure out where will we be 500 years from now. And so I would look from a futurist perspective on understanding what it means to be literate, because the concept of literacy changes with space and time. Number two, I would identify what is the role of college 500 years from now. And third, I would take a strong look at the importance of making sure we are preparing students for a world they will inherit and a workforce they will inherit. And that was something I would do from the start.
If I could build off what Paul was saying, the sort of architectural design issue that we have here. You know, we talk about this 19th century industrial model. It's built on an 18th century agrarian calendar. And in Maine, at least, the whole public school system is constructed on top of a system of municipalities that dates from the 17th century. We've got towns in Maine that were founded in the 1600s. And yet, if you live in this town, that's the school you go to. That line between the two districts was established in the 1600s. Yet that's where the school bus turns around. You know, so we have a system where we group children for instruction based on two factors: their physical age and their physical address, where they live and how old they are. And would we, if we were building a new system, would we use either one of those to determine which school and which teacher and which class that child is going to go to? No way.
I think one of the most important organizing principles is that we begin with the child as the central focus, and that we create for them not just an exceptional education, but an optimal education as well that meets that child no matter where they are as they enter the system, and designs curricula, designs instructional strategies to meet the needs of each child, to allow that child to progress according to their competency, to understand that time has got to stop being the limiting factor and allow them to learn anytime, anywhere, to stand accountable for those results, and to understand that the funding must follow that level of accountability. Fund success. Don't continue to fund just based on, as Tony says, it's no longer their right. We have to fund success. And so we must stand accountable for it. We all are ready to stand accountable for that. And then the urgency. We've got to get to work. We have to decide that this will not happen someday. It's got to happen now.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I would just add, I think we are fundamentally incentivizing the wrong thing today, and in fact consistently bolster a system that says and reinforces the things we say we don't believe in. And at that end, to that end, and I think Paul hit on this, it is truly about, are we incentivizing the things we say we believe in? And today we're not. So.
I think one of the disconnects we have is there's not a person sitting in this room that isn't a product of the current system. So when Patricia asked the question, what would it look like? We can all maybe talk about that from a policy level, from a conceptual level, but you know what? We are all still somewhat perverted by the fact that we experienced education the way it's always been delivered. So we have trouble imagining transferring that policy into a real-world application. And Paul mentioned, he said the RSD is not perfect. There is a document called Tough Choices or Tough Times. Great document. Great document. It's not perfect, but I sometimes think that that study is a framework that answers what we would look like if we were to do this all over again. So I would suggest that to our legislators, policymakers. If you haven't read that, it's a very interesting read about how you look at the actual policy and what it may look like in terms of commonplace implementation.
So Steve, let me start with a question for you. You know, the theme of the summit is education everywhere, and I add for all students. And Maine has really been leading the way with some one-to-one computing initiatives. You also have school districts that are piloting no age-based grade levels.
Yeah.
Students move on when they're proficient. If you could share with the audience what's going on there.
Yeah, we've had the one, this is our 10th year of our one-to-one computing initiative. We started in the middle schools, all the middle schools in Maine. We moved to about half of our high schools. We have 72,000 laptops deployed across our state. We have high-speed broadband in every single school in our state. And obviously that's allowed us, kids in very rural parts of our state, which has got some very rural parts in it, to access all kinds of things. But the other thing it's allowed us to do is a lot of these school districts to begin to look at that architectural design feature of those schools, the age-based grade levels, the seat time, the Carnegie units, and begin to figure out ways to move past that. So we have probably 8 or 10 school districts with about 20,000 kids in them that are really moving very aggressively on a proficiency-based model, very much like what Sal Khan described to us yesterday. But you go into these classrooms and there's no 7th grade. You walk into these middle schools, they have no age-based grade levels. All those students are moving when they master the standards. And it's a very student-oriented, student-centered model because the students decide which learning outcomes they're going to tackle and for how long and in what way. They decide how they're going to demonstrate mastery of their learning. And so when you go into these buildings, they're just abuzz. They hum with activity, and kids are grouping and regrouping, and they're working together. And you can lean over the shoulder of any of these kids and say, what are you working on? And they'll say, here's my learning outcome for the day. This is the learning outcome that I'm working on. Here's how I'm demonstrating my learning. This is what the assessment is going to be. I go into these classrooms. Our teacher of the year last year has a mixed 3-4. She's doing third, fourth grade. She's doing this exact model with these kids. And you're talking to 3rd and 4th graders, and you ask them what they're doing. Oh, this is my assessment of how I'm meeting the learning results on the state standards. I'm like, how do you know this? How does this little kid have that much literacy around learning? But the amount of ownership they have is tremendous. So we do have, and I think the technology, as we've talked this entire conference, the technology has given us the opportunity to do that. And I think that's the piece that we've been waiting for. We've all known that this lockstep model where you put kids together, every kid born between this date and this date, you put them together when they're kindergartners, they're going to move lockstep through the system, We've all known for years that wasn't the right way to do this. But I think now, at least we've seen in Maine with our laptop deployment, that we have a technology there that allows us to group and regroup kids to look at real-time data, just like Sal Khan showed us yesterday. And it's very exciting. And this is not, we don't have any big school districts. These aren't big school districts. This is Jackman, Maine, 714 people in that town. Their school system is a pioneering school system because they're moving this, and only because we have that technology deployment.
So Gerard, let me jump to you. You have worked in several different states, in Georgia, in Virginia, in Wisconsin, I believe, in Florida. And one of the pervasive issues that our country is facing, and certainly that the states are facing, is the achievement gap. And so what are some of the keys that you believe that lawmakers and policymakers need to put in place to start moving our states towards closing the achievement gap?
So I began my educational sojourn here in California. In fact, in 1992, I worked in the California legislature. And we were the second state in the nation to have a charter law. And it was also a push that went on the ballot in 1993 for a voucher initiative. It did not pass, but it was those two items that gave me an epiphany that what we call education and one size fits all simply does not work. And so there are three things that drive what I do. I want to know what works in American education, what does not work in American education, and what role will public policy play. And so in the different places I've lived, I've really reached three conclusions. Number one, we don't have an achievement gap problem. We have a political crap problem. And until you deal with the political crap problem, you won't close the achievement gap problem. So it's politics. That's number one. Number two, one size can't fit all. We shouldn't say it shouldn't. It can't fit all. So I look at the example that Governor Bush used in the presentation yesterday, and I've seen him give speeches on one milk, one milk product across the line. When I used to work at Bayo, I would often say I'm representing the chocolate milk. It can't fit all. And the history of how the United States was formed with our democratic institutions was not one size fits all. So when we say choice, it's broader than just vouchers or charters or after-school programs. It's an American creed that providing a very diverse set of options are important. So that's number two. Number three, I think gets to the point of public policy. Florida's been a leader in this. You have to have the courage to be unpopular. No other way around it. And so when Florida said we're going to take a state where we have a lot of kids who are on free reduced price lunch, who look very different than others, and we're going to make sure that we move from the lower rank to one of the best states in the nation, it's because the lawmakers, and many of them are here today along with my board members, they were the ones who said, let's have the courage to be unpopular. But making that happen, you have to have a grassroots aspect in this work. Parents are important, but so is your business community. There's no place I've worked in the United States. Milwaukee can be one example, and Virginia could be another. And Florida right now with our Chamber of Commerce. Without the business community at the table for conversation, it'll be tough to move things forward for both purposes of marketing and also for frankly saying this is kind of workforce that we need. So those are three things I picked up from my work in different states.
So Gerard, you used the term we have a political crap problem. I'm going to use that to jump to Chris Cerf. Question for you. So you're operating in a state with a Democrat legislature, you yourself as a Democrat reformer, and a Republican governor, and sometimes the disagreements there become highly personal. And there certainly has been some back and forth between the executive branch and the teachers' unions. If you could shed some light on us on how you're handling that, how it's been an impediment to move your reforms forward, how it's impacted maybe your legislative process, just share with us.
Sure, thanks. So there are two levels upon which discussions such as we're having today operate. There is the policy level and the political level. And I'm guessing that my colleagues up here would agree that the former is by far and away the easiest one. It's not that hard, frankly, to decide that we need to embrace digital learning and to make sure that we have the policies designed in order to get that done, in order to say a longer school day makes sense as we move out of, as you put it, the 17th and 18th century. But this is, and I'm so delighted to be speaking to legislators, this is all about political courage. This is 100% about that. This is a knife fight in a dark room. And I can assure you that we have shown a complete collective lack of courage in this country for the last many, many, many years. And as a result, we have been nibbling around the edges of changes. You know, we have programmatic changes here. Today we're for lower class size. Tomorrow we're for literacy coaches. But there are deep, fundamental organizational constraints that inhibit us from moving forward, and they are indeed the problem. And until we collectively take that on, and I'll tell you what, that's very, very, very hard when the interest groups, to a remarkably explicit degree, dictate political decisions. By the way, you go alone into a room with some legislators, and they will tell you what they believe in their heart, and then they will tell you that if I do that, I will lose my seat. Therefore, I'm not going to do that. And the dynamic is not a lot more complicated than that. So what I have admired about Governor Christie, and the reason I chose, despite being a Democrat, to throw myself into the fight in New Jersey. I was deputy chancellor in New York, so I've seen Big Bird before, by the way, is that we just have a very simple credo here, which is, it says we support policies as opposed to a political strategy. And we have a very clear, explicit view that certain things are good for kids and certain things aren't. You know, a law that says you must fire a demonstrably superior teacher and preserve the job of a demonstrably inferior teacher, which is the law in New Jersey, by the way. You just can't defend that. And by the way, the legislature is rabidly defending that right now. So I actually find it is very clarifying to have a bipartisan effort with a very obviously strong Republican governor and I as a Democrat saying there's very little space between us and President Obama and Arne Duncan around a very clear and explicit set of changes that need to happen. And I will tell you, it is confusing as heck to what is basically a blue state. They really don't know quite what to do with that. Thanks.
So Janet, you had a very interesting, some political issues when you first got started. When I read the articles, I was thankful that we don't have some of those issues in Florida, but basically the State Board of Ed can approve who you hire. And so in one of your first meetings, the State Board of Ed did not approve her chief of staff, her policy director. In fact, your legislative affairs director, who was almost 9 months pregnant, and they said, no. And I think they only approved your administrative assistant as far as hiring that. But yet you persisted, and you made some great reform efforts in year one. I want you to talk a little bit about the political dynamics of that, and then also talk to us about your agenda and how you would sum up your agenda in Oklahoma.
Sure. Thanks to the heroic efforts of our state legislature and our governor, many of which of the legislature are here today, and I can tell you it is astounding what occurred last year. Never before in the history of the state of Oklahoma was such an impressive suite of reforms passed by our legislature, and they don't know how much I appreciate their leadership and their dedication to the children, because adults get to petition the legislature, but children can't be in there petitioning the legislature. They're supposed to be in school. So they put the interests of children first, and they have no idea how much I appreciate them. But to sum up what they accomplished last year, I think the word empowerment is coming first into my mind. What they have done is they first of all empowered parents. They have empowered parents through a grading system, an A through F grading system, to understand their school and to understand their school's needs. So no longer will it be other people's children. Now it's my child. And not to point fingers, but it will empower parents to become a stronger partner in their child's education on a whole new level. The use of data and strong data systems will empower parents and taxpayers to understand their schools, understand the return on investment for our state's investment in children's education. It's going to empower teachers through an effective and an expansive teacher and leader effectiveness system that will empower teachers to understand their craft in a better way, understand what is expected of them, and then give them a clear path for continuous improvement. So they can't be just an effective teacher, but an exceptional teacher. But most of all, it empowers the children of the state of Oklahoma. First of all, by drawing a line in the sand and assuring that each child will be reading competently by the end of 3rd grade. We're setting them on a very clear path towards success. Through the instructional strategies and the rigor of the Common Core, children will have the opportunity to be exposed to a very clearly rigorous curriculum that their teachers understand, the parents understand, and leadership within their districts understand. One more thing, the power to learn anytime, anywhere, any place, and at their own pace. And to be able to do that in a choice environment where there's greater choice in the state. Those are the things that happened, and those things mostly happened last year. And so I just feel privileged to be a part of the process.
So Hannah, you've worked in the state of California in education, in Florida, and now in New Mexico. All states have different challenges, different issues, but yet I've heard you talk about there are really some foundational things that every state needs to get right and that the policymakers here need to consider for their state. Even if states are different, what are some of those foundational things?
We've talked actually a lot about many of them, and you just heard Janet talk about several of them as well. On top of what Paul talked about as far as systems and getting the system change that we need, what can we do right now in the midst of any state that we're in? And I think if you asked each one of these chiefs sitting here today, there's some pretty common overlaps. Number one, a commitment to high standards and accountability and being transparent. Janet mentioned letter grades, getting a system in place that's easy to understand, that engages our parents and communities in a meaningful way, that tells the truth about what is happening in our schools, that differentiates. We don't like to differentiate very often because then you've got to really acknowledge what's happening, and you've got to say, this is working, this isn't. When Janet talked about letter grades or an accountability system that says, you know what, we have some of our schools failing, and it's the God's honest truth, and we've got to do something about it. And on the other end, we've got some of our schools that are succeeding, and we need to acknowledge that progress and change that's taking place. So first, a transparent accountability system that engages beyond our school system. Today, and Joel Klein talked about this earlier, we've got our No Child Left Behind. It is absolutely a foundation piece in creating change across our nation. However, it does not give us a language to communicate, to engage our parents, communities, and hold ourselves accountable. Secondly, you've heard a lot about just a focus on the basics. Can our kids read? I will tell you today in New Mexico, 80% of our 4th graders are not reading on grade level. 80%. It goes beyond a crime. And the ability to begin to say, you know what, there's a lot of things we can do in education. In fact, I think one of the fundamental things that gets in our way is there are so many things that we get distracted. But a fundamental focus on the basics is a core part of any reform initiative because it calls out and says there are lots of things we want, but there are a few things. As Janet said, we're drawing a line in the sand, and until we see the change we expect, we will not stop. So that focus on the basics. Third, you've heard it already today, the focus on effective teaching and school leading. And in that, the incentives that say we believe and know how important our teachers are in creating change, and we're going to acknowledge it. And we're going to equip our systems in a way that our school leaders, our superintendents can actually make good choices that have kids in mind first. But it really does start with ensuring we've got effective teachers and school leaders in our classrooms and acknowledging when we don't and when we do. We've also talked about this day, another real key strategic lever for change in any state, options. And not just options. I think sometimes we're remiss, and we've talked about this. It's great to talk about charter schools and how important they are, and I believe they are. And we've got 84 charter schools in the state of New Mexico, and I'm excited about having more. However, that is not what's at stake when it comes to options. It is effective options. That we have a higher bar for those options that we provide for our students. Talked about digital learning and the importance of that. Another option when it comes to providing our students and our parents with places to go and choices that ensure that their kids are at the top of the list. So if you do the scan, like I said, and asked each one of these chiefs here what's in place today in their state and what was key, no matter where they are on the reform spectrum, if you will, on 5 years down the road or just beginning like some of us. Number one, ensuring that we have transparent, accountable systems in place. Number two, a laser focus on the basics, reading and math, our core subject areas. 3, effective options for parents. 4, ensuring that we have effective teachers and school leaders. And finally, and this is one that we've been talking a lot about, and I think you'll hear these rumblings across states today, the expectation, the return on investment. At the end of the day, we cannot continue to invest in something that produces little or no return, but we do it all the time. We say we value one thing, but we continue to invest in something else that does not produce the results for our kids and for each one of our state's future. So I do anticipate that increasingly in the conversation, it's not just, darn it, we're not getting the right return on our investment. What are we going to do about it? How do we hold ourselves literally accountable for the dollars we're investing in education and expect an outcome that really demonstrates whether or not we made a good investment? So I believe those 5 things are going to be key as we go forward.
So Tony, there was a lot of attention for the pickets and what was going on with Governor Walker in Wisconsin. However, you had some interesting happenings in Indiana. You had lawmakers crossing state lines and camping out in a hotel and blocking bills from passing. But yet somehow you and Governor Daniels were able to push through that, and you ended up winning the Fordham Institute's Reform Idol this year. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what are the policies that were passed and what you all had to do to get them?
First, we did this in one session because I don't believe it's in our best interest as states to do this one thing at a time. It is much too easy to attack these policies if you just do one thing at a time. And frankly, it makes the naysayers, it makes their arguments much more compelling because they can pick at each individual thing as you do it. So we built our entire agenda around competition, freedom, and accountability. And I'll draw kind of an image for you. Imagine a railroad track. One rail is competition. We passed 2 laws around that rail. House Enrolled Act 1002, which expanded our charter operation, our charter abilities. We now have a state authorizing board. We allow private not-for-profit universities to authorize charters, and we hold them, to Hannah's point, to very high accountability standards now. Because, frankly, we got hit pretty hard by our public school teachers that our charter schools weren't performing well, and in many instances they were right and we hadn't held them accountable. So we took that to heart and we put pretty strong accountability standards in. The other piece of the competition rail is the nation's most expansive voucher program. And it's a voucher program. I think it's in the law. Representative Baining is here. He was the guy who carried that. Bob, thank you for that. I think it's called the Opportunity Scholarship. It's a voucher. It's a means-tested. About 65% of our kids qualify. In 8 weeks, we scaled up. We had a cap of 7,500 kids. In 8 weeks, the department implemented a plan, and we have 4,000 low and modest income children now having choices they've never had before in the state of Indiana, and next year we're going to have a lot more. So that is the competition rail. But let's be very blunt, folks. No matter how much competition we put into the system, the majority of our children are going to go to our public school system as it sits today. So if you don't do some things to structurally address their needs, the competition rail is going to eat the public school rail. So we said, let's give and let's build on our other rail, freedom and local authority. First, we limited collective bargaining in the state to wages and wage-related fringe benefits. So we took out all the garbage that gets in the way of student learning and gets in the way of leaders running schools out of collective bargaining agreements. Okay, it was a very important piece because, again, Wisconsin got a lot of play, but what we tried to say is all these were interrelated. We didn't overreach in collective bargaining. We let teachers negotiate their wages and wage-related fringe benefits, but they don't get to negotiate seniority rights, last in, first out. They don't get to do all that. And then the last piece was our teacher and principal effectiveness. It's been very well received. We are implementing it. Our team is doing a great job. It requires annual evaluations, significantly based on student performance. We have a growth model. And the last thing it does, and I say this all the time, unless your evaluations address HR decisions and pay, they really mean nothing. So we require districts next year to have performance-based pay models, not salary schedules, performance-based pay models, where only 33% of a teacher's annual raise can be based on seniority and degrees. So they have to use student, other, highly effective, needs improvement, and ineffective, have to use the data inside those categories to drive the annual increase. And then those little wooden things in between the two rails, that's accountability. That holds the track together. That holds the track together. We just took 5 schools that were chronically underperforming from 2 school corporations in our state. And we had a law since 1999 that allowed schools to chronically underperform without us doing anything. We walked in, we said we're going to do it, and we put 5 schools, 4 in Indianapolis, 1 in Gary. We are saving those children from what has happened to them for the last number of years, and we are going to put those schools in the hands. Thank you. So accountability puts the whole thing together, and we did that, and we were able to say that's comprehensive reform, because now we can say we have really changed the structures that really are the underpinning of our education system in the state.
So Paul and Eric, as former chiefs, you all pushed through great reforms in your states. Share a little bit about what the biggest challenges were to pushing those reforms through, and now that you've left the state, what are the biggest threats to turning back those reforms, and to the lawmakers in the state in the room? What are you going to do about it?
So the challenges are numerous. I think the biggest challenge is what's between your ears. Whether you have the capacity to stay the course and do the right thing. Every one of the folks up here on this podium have had to fight for something. Many of you out there have had to fight for something, and oftentimes you've been pushed. Compromise, show compromise. I still read the news articles. They still, refer to me lovingly back at home now that I've stepped down and doing other things. In fact, I thought they were yelling at me this morning when I walked in here. I said, I quit this job. But, they still refer to me as being divisive because I wouldn't compromise. Ladies and gentlemen, the obstacles have been created are enormous because most people haven't been fighting the construction of the obstacles for the last 25 or 30 years. The obstacles in place are enormous, and if we compromise, then we will be compromising to keeping the obstacles in place. Now, that is divisive, but by God, you got to keep between your ears right. I like to say, you got to get your mind right, Luke. We're going to get your mind right. Let me tell you the biggest obstacle I had to face. The common belief that not all children can learn. Now, I hear people say it rolls off their tongue. All children can learn. But I'm going to tell you, they don't believe it. Most people don't believe it. And until we address that problem and prove that that's the case, listen carefully, prove that that's the case, they'll say they believe it, but they will not believe it. And as long as they don't believe it, you'll get articles like I got all the time. A teacher would say, I'm working very hard, but you don't know how difficult it is. With little Johnny goes home to a difficult home and comes to school hungry. I can empathize with that teacher. But there are teachers who are successful with those kids. There are many teachers that are successful. So here's one tip. I went to a school board meeting and told them, I'm going to take your schools if you don't fix them. And they said, what are you going to do better than us? These kids can't succeed, literally, in a public meeting. Prove to me, they said, that they can succeed. Give me the name of the school. And you know what? I couldn't do it. They stumped me, and I looked like a fool. But I know I got to do the right thing. I went back, I looked at the data, I evaluated the data, and I found 20 schools that were going against the grain, that were proving that poor children can be successful. If you could do nothing else in your state other than identify the schools where the kids are proving that they can be successful, you will be able to respond to the common wisdom that not all kids can learn. I'll tell you this little story. I went up to Northeast Louisiana to meet with a superintendent who was one of my few superintendents who was kicking butt and not accepting the political crap answer. I said, what is your biggest accomplishment? He said, I want to show you this little classroom. 12 kids, 10 black, 2 white, all poor, all 8th graders operating at the 2nd grade level when they started the 8th grade. Now, how the hell they got through our accountability system, don't ask me. But they do it. That's why you got to turn off the leaks in the accountability system. Now, these kids were being given a blended learning environment, everything we heard about yesterday, in a little podunk city up in northwest Louisiana, rural community. I said, what's the success been? The teachers didn't let them answer the question. They let the kids answer the question. And these kids stood up one by one and talked with authority and talked about how much they had accomplished and said that they had moved 3 and 4 grade levels over a period of 6 months. With the highest performing, the highest effective math teacher, reading teacher, and paraprofessional, I put 3 on these 12 kids. They caught them up 3 and 4 months in 3 and 4 years worth of education in 6 months. Now here's the key. I said, what is the parental involvement with these kids? Because parental involvement is the real boogaboo out there as to why kids can't learn. And they said, when these kids started the school year 6 months ago, no parents came to anything and hadn't come to anything for years. But since they've been in here and the kids are successful, the parents are coming. All of them come. And there was one big guy who came in there and told the teacher with tears in his eyes, this is the first time you've asked me to come to school and tell me my son was doing well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the reason there's no parental involvement is because the educators are not educating the children well enough to cause the parents to have hope to participate in the school. That is my opinion. It is time to stop blaming the kids and blaming the parents. If you were sending your kids to a school, like the schools that many of our kids go to, you would not participate either. Now, here's the bottom line. Every defense that will be put up against you in whatever it is you do, changing pay for performance, evaluating teachers, LIFO, all of that is based on a belief that every child can succeed. So until you prove to your constituents and the teachers who call you on the phone and the parents who complain about the legislation you may want to bring forward, until you can prove to them you have schools in your community that are successful, you will not succeed in this bold endeavor.
I'll be brief on my answer about the two quick key questions in what you asked Patricia about. What are some of the challenges coming in, and what's the likelihood that the work that's been done is going to sustain itself after one leaves? And I'd start by talking about the first part of that question about what are the key components. I think this is I also, like many of these folks, have been in many states involved in education, and so I'm familiar with many different operations. Some states very successful in reform, and some less than successful, or even staying away from it as quick as they can. There are some key things that made the job more doable, I think, for myself in Florida, and where I've seen it elsewhere across the country. One is when you have a state that has the presence of a sitting governor or a former governor that still cares and is still involved, like Governor Jeb Bush, you've got one leg up on reform right off the bat. So, I mean, that's a good key. And so, the involvement of executive leadership in the urgency about reform is key. For myself, I never wanted to be a commissioner. I thought I was a very successful school superintendent. I didn't want to have to fiddle with the legislature and all those folks with those opinions and argue until forever and never get anything done. Going to Florida, I found the exact opposite was true. To this day, I think some of my dearest friends, some of my highlights in my career professionally in terms of educational work and reform was dealing with legislative leadership and legislative staff in the state of Florida, that there was an alignment. I credit a lot of that to Governor Bush and the foundation that was established, but it wasn't party specific. I could deal with either side on this, but you could find those leaders in the legislature that were like-minded, that were willing to take forward that absolutely insane piece of legislation and drive it, and find the coalition of support to get a bill passed on the last hour of the last night or morning of the session. And so the legislative commitment can either kill a state chief and can kill notions of reform, or can liberate it. And I'd say the key to that is the question that you've heard being raised by each one of these chiefs is that, is this in the best interest of children? Is this in the best interest of children? A state board in Florida that I think is rather unique, and I know there are many state boards of education that are very effective across the country. There are also some that are very unfortunate for children. And in Florida, we had what I would term not a state board of education, but a corporate board. We have and had executives, executive leaders on the State Board of Education that I could pick off. I need this done with this issue. This is the strength of my board. I can go to one person and help drive that work done through. It wasn't a matter of just getting the vote. It was the work and the implementation and all that follows that allowed it to happen. So the nature of that state board is critical. And these three layers, executive branch, the legislature, and the State Board of Education, if those aren't in alignment, if you're one legislator out there, it's a great start, but you've got a lot of work to do, and it's going to be at the top before we can really drive it at the state level. We chose to make the Department of Education in Florida a reform department, not a monitoring and bureaucratic checking operation to see if all the trains were running right, but actually do something to change the status of education in Florida. The biggest roadblock that I saw, and I still see, and I think one of the greatest challenges in implementation of reform and driving reform, legislating reform, is in that governance structure at the local level, which is in many cases, too many cases, extraordinarily incestuous. It is very symbiotic. It is you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and it is all about the self-interest and the benefit of adults. And the union board superintendent relationship can be challenged at times, but is politically dangerous, either for elected school board members or appointed or elected superintendents of schools. And that relationship is difficult to push. So when you will see the funny bird show up in meetings in every state when a legislature and a state decides to really move aggressively on reform, because you're messing with that symbiotic relationship at the local level and you're making things uncomfortable for the adults. You're going to make them work to a higher standard. You're going to hold them to tighter accountability. You're going to give them the children options outside of the closed shop that they've created. You're pushing on that system. And so that was where, when in Florida we worked to pass aggressive reform legislation, and we did I think the legislature did a masterful job in that over the last 4 years. That's where you're going to see the flare-up, and and they're the first ones to the editorial boards. They're the first ones to parent groups and so forth. So it makes it a pretty ugly dogfight. It is a knife fight in a dark room, and but that's the courage, and that is the one sustaining peace. That same relationship, that symbiotic relationship of adults that will fight against reform, will also work aggressively to destroy reform once passed. And so the sustainability of it. Now that Paul's gone from Louisiana, there will be those that are organizing at this minute to see how we can take this apart and what kind of political structure can we hold things back in a New Mexico or a New Jersey and so forth. And those are the groups that are planning right now, and who's going to be the big bird at the next meeting. And so those are the issues that make this a challenging process forward. The facts out of Florida, though, are facts that all need to remember and listen, is that when bold leadership at the state level chooses to raise the bar, chooses to raise the standard, toughen the accountability, raise the cut scores, all of those issues, when they choose to make that tough decision, it'll be tough on the front edge, but the experience of Florida over a decade will tell you, you might see a dip, and that really gets tough politically for year one, but after that, the beneficiary of your boldness will be the children of your state. And every time, and that success that follows will be what sustains the reform, I'm confident, over time for our states and our nation.
So let me ask some questions to the group, anyone who wants to answer. One of the issues, or one of the topics that I think is going to be facing us is how to get effective teachers in the classroom. And one of the groups that produces teachers are state-approved colleges of education. And I'll never forget when I worked for Governor Bush, I would get these emails. They would come every year around March. And so I knew there was a particular professor at a university that shall remain unnamed, University of South Florida, where I would get emails from people who were being trained to become teachers in Florida classrooms who would, all of a sudden, they must have just had their lesson on how terrible testing was and how terrible, you can't judge kids based on a test, things like that. I think there are other issues with colleges of education. I want you all to just share with us, what can we do?
I'd like to jump in if I could for 1 second. And Paul, you've been working this field for a long time, but the very nature of higher education, academic freedom, and so forth, drives itself to taking whatever philosophical belief you want into the classroom. And in Florida, it was not uncommon for me to meet first-year teachers out there in the field that absolutely hated the FCAT. And they've been told for 4 years in their colleges of education how bad testing and accountability was, and the standards movement and so forth, and that it needed to be more free thought and creative ways of learning and so forth. So there's an inherent problem in what I didn't see in Florida, and our data didn't reflect it in terms of learning gains, was a clear connection between a teacher preparation program seeing themselves as a vendor of a business that wants to hire well-trained employees, and that direct link of what is needed and is the pipeline producing the kind of graduates that's going to lead to the results that the consumer, the school district, the classroom, the school, the children, the parents are expecting. And quite the opposite. It was like a free-flowing thought, and we don't have any responsibility for it once they get out there, which is just a disaster.
I saw several of you ready to jump at it, so.
So
Patricia,
let me just make one real quick comment. In Louisiana, I can say that we're the only state in the country that measures the value-added effectiveness of first and second year teachers and ties back that effectiveness to every teacher preparation program certified by the state of Louisiana. So whether it's Teach for America, the New Teacher Project, LSU, University of Louisiana at Monroe, I can tell you today which teachers coming out of each one of those preparation programs drive academic achievement up year by year in every classroom in the state of Louisiana. Now, that accountability system has been in place in Louisiana for 4 years. And all of a sudden, all of the higher ed institutions have changed how they educate the educators that they produce, because they are being graded. But the only thing we don't have is a letter grade system. We have a 5-4-3-2-1 system. If you want to look at it, go to the Louisiana Board of Regents website and look for the Value Added Assessment Teacher Model. If you want to know more about it, Arnie Duncan is going to go around the country and tout this. And I'm not so much interested in bragging on Louisiana as giving that away to you that you could immediately put in place in your state and have an immediate reaction on the teacher preparation programs that you have.
as Paul said, the numbers will set you free. It is about gathering effective data, putting that together with teacher and leader effectiveness ratings, and then referring it back to the teacher's preparatory college that got them ready there, and holding them accountable for those results. It's about assuring that during the training of each teacher that there's specific instruction, not around theory, but actually around instructional practices and how to administer differentiated instruction to children with different learning styles. To understand the needs of children with special needs and special education, we've got to get our traditional classroom teachers to understand the needs of special needs children that are in their classrooms.
So before we leave this particular topic, I'm going to put a plug in here for the National Council for Teacher Quality. So the National Council for Teacher Quality is conducting research right now. They're going to publish next year with U.S. News and World Report an evaluation of every state college of education in the country. Your colleges of education are going to be in that report. They are having to right now file lawsuits to get information from your colleges of education in order to do their evaluation. So one of the first things I think our lawmakers can do when they get back to their states, make sure your colleges of education are turning over that data to the National Council on Teacher Quality. I just had to put that little plug in there. So an issue that every state's facing now is funding shortfalls, or budget shortfalls, funding cuts for public schools. If you could all just talk about how the funding cuts are impacting education or education reforms or you within your department.
First, I like to jump in here. I think it's the best thing that's happened to us. because it's gonna create another discussion that, in my opinion, will truly transform education. And that is a discussion. I'm going to pick on you legislators here for a minute. I would ask you how you develop your education budgets in your state. If it's like our guys do it, about 12 of them go into a room on the 4th floor of the Indiana State House. About 11 o'clock on the last night, the smoke comes out of the chimney, and they say, "Oh my God, we know how to fund education." And for the last 4 months, we've had people working on ed policy, and those two groups didn't talk to each other. The funding issue is going to create a situation where we begin to put fiscal policy and education policy together, which will force us to maximize our resources. You know, we did something, we had a very small cut in 2010. Our districts didn't think it was that small, but believe me, it was not earth-shattering. The sun did rise the next morning. But we sent out a citizens checklist to every media outlet, anyone who could go to a school board meeting that had like 2 or 3 pages of efficiency issues that would say, have you done this before you laid off a teacher? Did you quit paying health insurance for your administrators all but $1 for them and their family? Did you consolidate unused buildings? Did you do these things so we could, because they were all saying they were going to lose teachers. We said, well, let's talk about changing your operational practices so you don't have to do that. Putting your ed policy and fiscal policy decisions together. So I believe the problem we had with the stimulus package and race to the top, and I said this last night to Governor Wise, in many instances, and my good friend Todd Houston's here, and he always says this, that was very simply whiskey for alcoholics. Okay, it didn't force local school districts to make hard decisions and start putting education policy and fiscal policy together. So I don't think there's a time like the present to really drive this discussion about education reform. And I think the current economic situation is the best catalyst we have.
It's going to do the same thing for the state departments as well. Our governor has ordered a zero-based budget for the first time in the state's history. We're going to start at zero. And he's asking all of us in every department across state government to go in and justify every single dollar that we spend, every program. And, you know, I've been on the job for 7 months, and I still go through the halls and I go, I don't know what that person does that's here in the department. You know, we can't, you know, we just can't continue to do that. I can't continue to do that. So we're going to go through and justify every single expenditure because we can't afford not to. We have to figure out where every dollar's going and is it doing the right thing for kids.
I mentioned earlier, I think there are some key strategic levers for change, and I said I think we're going to see the 5th one, that return on investment, rising in importance. And I believe that I'll speak for New Mexico and say, not unlike what Tony went through in Indiana, we also had a budget cut, not that large compared to other states, but certainly significant, and in New Mexico at least, framed in such a way that it was. But at the end of the day, we were able, not unlike you, Tony, it wasn't a checklist. We review every single district and charter school budget by law. We're required to. And in that process, begin to ask the questions about what return are you getting for that program you're investing in? And we were able to secure that not a single teacher across the entire state was let go, which was obviously a starting point when it comes to when budget cuts come, personnel impacted. And it was because we began to ask the tough questions. It's allowed us to ask the question when we're talking about ensuring our children can read by the end of 3rd grade, what part of spending on average between state and federal dollars, $11,000 per year per kid, so $44,000 by the end of 3rd grade, says we still need more money to make sure our kids can read. It allows us to ask the question, really, really, which part of what we're investing right now is not enough to guarantee that our kids can do the basics. And so I believe it's actually, we're remiss if we do not take the opportunity to ask the tough questions because they're being served on a platter.
I would just say one very important piece is that because all of us will get this, that now's not the time for reform because we don't have any money. And all I can say in Florida for 4 years under my term there as commissioner, we had to reduce per pupil spending because of the economy, And over those that 4-year period, the graduation rate went up 10 percentage points, and the gap among subgroups in graduation rate was narrowed. So when I go out to struggling, low-performing schools, the problem I see is never a lack of money. It's the misappropriate use of money. Instead of seeing one well-focused, well-trained staff, well-trained on a reading initiative or reading intervention initiative, you'll see 20, and teachers are just totally confused. And so it's the use of money and what it's put to that is the key point. It's not the lack of it that's keeping us from where we need to be in America.
I am certainly in agreement that the fiscal challenges we face is going to force districts and all of us to find greater efficiencies. But my deeper hope is that it forces us to take a very hard look at certain basic operating assumptions of school funding. There are a couple things that the deeper you get into it, the more nuts I think you appreciate that it is. It starts with the idea that the worse you do, the more you get. That's a basic operating basis of our funding formula. Secondly, the money, in fact, in operation is not keyed in many states to actual children, but goes to districts, and then the districts dispense it in ways where there are tremendous inequities among schools within the same district. There is the first instinct of most school districts, and I'll let you reach your conclusion as to why, is that when we get more money, we're going to hire more people, teachers' aides or this or that, as opposed to we're going to try to find a way to get better results, and whether that's through the use of different technology systems or different things that really change the paradigm in which education operates. So I think that there is a deep connection between funding and policy, and the evidence is beyond overwhelming. In fact, there are very few things that are more consistent than this. It's not that money doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It is that money that is distributed into a school system that is unmoored from sound policies, not just how much you spend, but how it's spent, is a piece of the equation that we are all going to be forced to pay much, much more attention to in light of the tough fiscal times we find ourselves in.
So one other very simple, practical solution to the budget crisis problem. We can educate more children for less better in this opportunity by online schools. Very simple. By allowing online schools to come into your community in your state, which many states prohibit or really hurt the ability of people to come in and do this, you can reduce your expense and improve your outcomes. And here's how you do it. You pay less money to online schools because they don't have the same cost structure as a traditional school. So states will pay them the formula funding minus a percentage. So bam, you automatically are cheaper with the delivery of an online school. We do it through charter schools in Louisiana. We opened 3. We had 2,000 slots available and 5,000 applicants. Now people talk about homeschoolers. They aren't really the ones who even take advantage of it. It's a lot of kids who don't like the environment of the school that they're in. This idea of digital learning is the opportunity that's created with this budget crisis. And then I'll give you the other piece, accountability. If they don't do a good job, you put them out of business. It's real simple stuff. It's cheap, and it solves your budget problem.
So in Florida, we had to approve a budget in August. And what's unique about our Department of Education is we have K-12 and higher ed. And so when you look at a budget crisis, we can't focus on K-12 alone. We have to look at the remediation costs that we're spending for children who've gone through our system 12 years, sometimes 13, who go to college, and college presidents are telling you the remediation that we have to provide to students who came from our schools is a challenge. So the board across the line are asking the tough questions. I've got to talk to presidents and school board members and superintendents and say at the end of the day, this is an unsustainable model. You can't continue to invest billions of dollars, high school, to have someone graduate, to come from a school write statistics across the board, and yet there's a reading and a math challenge. So this is only a K-12 problem. It allows us to raise questions with our presidents, with their board of trustees and others on saying, how can we do a better job of making sure they enter your school ready, but more importantly, what role are you playing on the front side?
So we have time for one more question if we're going to give the opportunity for each of you to answer. What's next? What's next for you? What should be next for the policymakers in the audience? What's next? When you leave this conference, what are you going to do? Anyone?
I think the most exciting thing going on right now was really highlighted at this conference, and that's the whole notion of blended learning. I think we're really at the front edge of that reform. There's some creative work going on in the country, but it really hasn't been, I don't think, fleshed out, certainly at a state policy level yet, to the point that it can be or that it will be. And I think there are, again, if you keep the first question first, what's the benefit to a child? The ability to flip this thing around, as Con said yesterday, but to expand the school day, expand the school week, expand the school year, deal with the wide variety of student interests and needs that we have in our schools, and drive to better performance and accountability. I think all those things, and raise quality, all those things are possible through a very smart application of blended learning and technology. So I think for me personally, that's where I would like to see a lot of time spent for myself, but for others as well.
I would say in New Mexico, we've got 5 things right in front of us. Number one, we just passed the school grading law. So implementing that law in a way that is meaningful, that differentiates, that demonstrates there are schools that are successful, to Paul's point, and those that are not, and there's something we're going to do about it. I will tell you, in that law, we said that if you are a D or F school, you must pay if a child and a parent choose to go to an online learning option. So providing that choice embedded in as an option for our failing schools is part of one of the things we'll be pursuing. Secondly, I mentioned a laser focus on the basics, so we are pursuing a reading initiative and putting that towards the legislature. We are also pursuing 2 grants that I think are significant, that speak to some of the policies we've talked to today. Number one, we're looking to build a private, with a private foundation, there help a strategic plan for implementation of a digital learning strategy over the next 3 to 5 years, so that we have our eye on where do we want to go and what do we need to lay in place on the ground right now through legislation and blended learning models, et cetera, so that we can begin to see real movement and real options for kids over the long term and the short run. Teacher evaluations and principal evaluations as well is something we're pursuing with our legislature in January. So we've got several things, and the last thing we're pursuing is, and I really do believe what Paul said, and he planted this seed in my mind a few months ago when he said, you've got to demonstrate it is possible. Because there are too many folks, whether conscious or unconscious, and I think half the time it's unconscious, don't believe that every child can learn, and it really can take place. So we are also working to call out the top 40 schools and the bottom 40 schools in regards to performance and partner them, so that our school leaders in our state that are successful can receive stipends and mentor those who are not successful, so that we begin to say, wait a minute, this is not about the Department of Education telling you how to run your school. It is your colleague next door who said, I can do it, did it, and he's here to help you. So no more excuses, but it's in living color in our own state. Kids are learning, and there are high poverty schools, diversity, all the things that folks say it's not possible. No more. It's your colleague next door.
So 3 points. Number one, Florida had a very strong push on K-12 reform, dealing with teacher and performance pay, accountability across the board. Commissioner Smith, the foundation, and others, the board, were very supportive. And so it's time to now implement that work. Number two is to have a strong conversation about higher education in Florida, and for what we need to do to make sure kids not only prepared, but that we're getting the best return on the investment that we're making in one of the best systems for higher education in the country. Third, for me, as a new commissioner in Florida, is to take the message of Tallahassee and move it out to all the districts throughout Florida. Many people I've talked to when I've had a chance to travel, they ask one really simple question. what can we do to make our schools better? Now, that's a question where someone is actually saying, tell me what we can do. And so what Chiefs for Change are doing in a very, I guess, symbolic way is modernizing departments of education to move them from being a regulatory agency to one where there are solutions. I like to say, I'm here from the Department of Education. I'm here to help. And I want that to be real. And so it's really getting out there and marketing and pushing the great entrepreneurial things that we're doing in Florida. And so those are the three things we're moving forward with.
So, although I'm no longer a chief in Louisiana, I'm working very hard on this whole idea of teacher efficacy. Teacher efficacy. Teacher effectiveness, teacher efficiency, teacher efficacy. We have to build a high-fidelity system to be able to help teachers be more effective. Now, a lot of people think it's for the purpose of firing teachers, getting rid of teachers, and there's been a whipped-up fear around that, and the unions have whipped that up. I sat on a panel with the union leaders more than a month ago, and that's the fear that they want to whip up. But I said, if I were to, in Louisiana, look at the number of ineffective teachers, we've done a tremendous amount of high-fidelity evaluation of effectiveness based on a growth model of all the teachers in the state of Louisiana. And if I identified those that are worse than the first-year teacher effectiveness, it would be over 28% in all 4 subjects that we test. 28% of the teachers teaching in Louisiana are not as effective as the first-year average teacher coming out of the schools of higher education. So if I were to say, we're going to fire those people, I would be a doofus. Then Big Bird would jump up, because there's no way to replace 28% of the teachers. So as I said to the union folks, this is not about firing people. This is about improving the 28%. This is about making them better, making them more effective. So I think that what I'm going to try and do, working with a lot of states who are working on this, Tennessee is very far ahead, Louisiana is far ahead, Colorado, many are close behind, is try to change the discussion. The purpose of teacher evaluations is to improve their efficiency so they can be better, so our kids can be better. And if we can change that dynamic around trying to fire people, but trying to improve people, maybe we can be more successful.
So we're going to have a very busy fall, but in the next legislative session, we have pending, first of all, in the area of teacher and educator effectiveness, a bill that takes on tenure, takes on LIFO. Simultaneously, we are building, because we can do it by regulation, a totally different evaluation system with a very different set of metrics, and based on, we're using something called student growth percentiles and not value added, but it gets you to a very similar place. So number one is educator effectiveness. Number two is accountability. Our existing accountability system is woefully inadequate, and we're aspiring and in the process of sort of throwing it out and replacing it with something that really focuses on the particular performance level of schools. It will feature things like identifying the lowest 5% of the schools in the state as measured by graduation rates and performance on objective measures, giving them, I don't think I'm going to go to a 4-year runway, but a 1 or 2 year runway to improve. And after that happens, as Paul was saying before, then you've lost the right, a district's lost the right to run that school. So we will be putting it into a separate school district, and because I actually don't think states are particularly competent at running schools, we will be looking for ways to essentially catalyze a new relationship with someone who does know how to run schools. So that new accountability system is central to what we're doing. It will involve measures and report cards and the like. The third is we are forced by circumstances to take a very hard and fresh look, not so much at the amount of money, but at our funding formula, and that is a gigantic and incredibly complex effort. So some of the things we're very interested in doing is creating innovation funds and success funds. So for example, we are this year piloting a process where we give $1 million prize to be divided among 2 districts that get the most gains for their special ed students over the course of a 2-year stretch. And I can pretty much promise you that that single act will get more success in the state than all the micro rules and regulations that we spend most of our energy doing. So we're looking at different ways to expend funds. We're in the process of taking a hard look at our charters. We are very charter friendly, but we're also need to impose a new level of discipline around accountability. The basic premise, as again Paul said, is that if you don't get success with a school, you don't have the right to run it. And I don't really care if it's a charter school or a traditional public school or magnet or themed or whatever the case may be, and we haven't been very good at that. So we're imposing a different system for both granting charters and reviewing them and pulling their ticket when they're not succeeding. And then lastly, I'm pretty sure that Governor Bush and his group is going to give New Jersey an F when they come out to putting the report card out around whether we have created a regulatory and legislative environment that embraces digital learning and new forms. So we are very much committed to addressing and fixing that. But most of all, I need him to send me a team to tell me exactly what to do. I mean, and by the way, I ain't kidding. Bandwidth and our most prized commodity is time, and we don't have very much of it. So I'm just sort of lobbing a hint in the direction of the governor. But we are very, very committed to embracing digital learning in a way that really, really inspires more and more innovation coming into the state.
Yeah, I think this is going to sound a little repetitive as we're getting down the line here, because I think we've all got the same kind of things on our agenda. Before we even get to our next legislative session, what we want to get done there, we're still busy implementing things from last legislative session. We passed charter school legislation last spring, and so we're busy. We became the 41st state at long last to have charter schools, so we're busy implementing that. We also passed an innovative schools bill, and we also put a regionalization and innovation fund together. The legislature wouldn't give me any money to put in the fund, so we got to fund the fund, and then we're going to use it to try and encourage some innovation and building some regional capacities. And of course, we've got the governor's zero-based budget initiative, so we've got to go through the department and do that work. In terms of next session, we've got, I think, the same thing on the list that a lot of folks here have. The digital learning piece is huge. I think we've led the way in terms of getting the hardware out there. We've got computers all over the place. We've got high-speed internet. But we need to get on top of the digital content piece and really find a good solution to that, because I don't think we're quite there yet. So that's a big piece. We want to do some pieces on school choice. Maine has one of the oldest school choice programs in the country, but it only gets to about 10 or 12,000 kids who live in communities that don't operate their own high schools because they're too small. Those kids have choice. We've got to build that out and make sure that we have those choice options for every student in our state. We've got to do something big, huge on teacher effectiveness. And I don't know if Kate's still here, but our dear friends at NCTQ took my fair state and laid a big fat F on it in their last report around our teacher policies, and we're going to take some huge strides in that direction. We're going to be picking the brains of a lot of people in here to figure out how to do that. And then the last piece is the accountability piece. We have the waiver, and we've got to build a new system. Our system was built basically to comply with the NCLB. It's not a very innovative system. It doesn't do what we need it to do. We're doing a lot of talk this week about the ABC model, so I'm going to be picking Patricia's brain, and we're going to essentially take the Florida playbook back to Maine and get to work when the legislative session begins in January.
Well, before I start, I want to say one thing, Patricia. While I said this group started with the vision and the leadership of Eric and Paul, this group wouldn't be here today without the muscle, without the heart, and the passion for this from Governor Bush and the foundation. So thank you very much. Accountability's big. I believe gentle pressure relentlessly applied yields results, and accountability will drive reform. So we are going to shorten the window that our schools have to perform, and we will then move to put some proactive steps that the districts can take to improve themselves, and if they don't, we will step in. And like Chris said, we don't believe we can run schools in the state. We go out and develop contractual relationships with those who can. So we will continue to move in that direction. Tom Luna's here. Tom passed a bill last year that has, what, Tom, 2 virtual classes by the time students graduate. Florida has 1. I hope we can get to 3, or maybe 1 a year. You know, I said yesterday during the 3rd grade reading, and this is just something I'd like for our staff to think about, I think we ought to end social promotion in the 6th grade for math. You know, it's very, we talk about 3rd grade reading. Well, think about the 4 pillars of algebra. Students should have that by the time they leave 6th grade. So, you know, I think a 6th grade threshold and I believe a more comprehensive 8th grade threshold would really set us on the track for college and career readiness. I don't know that we'll get there. I think the biggest thing we are going to do is address funding. Even though this isn't a budget year, we're going to really work on this fiscal policy and ed policy, that we're going to introduce multiple count dates and real-time funding, if you will, so that money follows children wherever they go in a transient mobile population. So when a child leaves a public school to a private school, or a public school to a public charter school, or vice versa, money goes with them. So those will be the things in a short session, because we have a short non-budget session this year, and then we expect to expand on everything we did in 2013 if we get the opportunity to do so.
Well, first of all, not only thank you to Governor Bush for your leadership, but thank you to your staff. First of all, for the way they support us as an organization. We are able to do the things we do because of the support that we get from the foundation. And thank you so much for an exciting and, I know, a stimulating and thought-provoking 2 days. A lot of hard work went into this, and we are all so grateful for that and for that opportunity. Well, we are pursuing what we call in Oklahoma a C3 strategy, that we are preparing every Oklahoma child to be college, career, and citizen ready for the 21st century. And so we are building upon the sweeping reforms of last year and implementing those reforms with fidelity and with quality. And I can tell you that's a big job ahead of all of us. We're keeping the bar high, and we intend to hit that bar. So it means that we're virtually changing the culture of education in the state of Oklahoma. At the State Department, we have high expectations for ourselves, high expectations for our teachers and our superintendents and principals, and we're moving forward in a determined fashion to make sure that happens. We are absolutely pursuing digital learning and the opportunity for Oklahoma children to be able to pursue that. We're pursuing the expansion of choice for children in education. That's so very important. And as I said, implementation of a very robust student accountability system. But it doesn't stop there. With that system, we will focus on training teachers, principals, and superintendents on how to use that data to make decisions, to drive decisions in the classroom and for the benefit of those children. Because we will constantly, over this next year, everything that we're doing at the department is focused on the children of the state of Oklahoma. That will be how we will move forward in terms of our decisions of how we're spending the money and how we're pursuing policy in the state.
So if you all would join with me and give a round of applause to my heroes, Chiefs for Change.